All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Florida. Welcome to Destin, a place that you know is truly on the map when Taylor Swift has a song that she's singing about it. I don't know if you all have heard it. It's called Florida with not one, not two, but three exclamation marks. So welcome to Destin, a great location, a great place. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida, which is about 2.5 hours to the east. And this is definitely a great venue for a conference. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with me this morning to talk about student success. And I wanted to frame this conversation really in two different ways. One, in terms of how we personalize our experiences with students. The personalization factor, I think, is so important. And then two, discussing and thinking about different societal trends and how that impacts our work. So I realize the title is, and I thought about this after the fact, is one of those long kinds of dissertation titles that kind of seem a little boring. So you might just think of this as a way of saying think differently about what you do, about student success and student retention. So that's really the charge that I'm going to try to cover here with you today. But again, thank you for the opportunity. So today's talk, as I mentioned, think about it in interwoven buckets. I'm going to share some examples from my work at Tallahassee State College as well toward the end of the presentation. But I wanted you to really think about and consider, along with me today, trends, how we personalize our work with students, and then how we create and innovate and create outcomes that we ultimately want to see, and that's our students being successful in either transferring to universities or entering the workforce. So before I moved any further, I wanted to share an AI-generated image with you. This is a Simpsonized AI-generated image of my family, so that you could see, just have a sense of my family here as I'm speaking with you today. I also, within the context of our presentation today, I wanted to give you a sense too of the real family. So this is the real picture. Let me see if I can go back. It's not letting me go back. That's interesting. Let's try this again. Okay, this is the Simpsonized version. So notice the number of people there. This is the real picture. Notice the number of people there. So I'm going to sprinkle in some AI conversation here today as we think about student success and innovation. But one key takeaway as you think about AI is you have to fact check, right? AI gave us an extra family member, gave us a daughter, and we do not have a daughter. Now let's see if we can move forward. Okay, so just to give you a sense too, Tallahassee State College, we were actually, up until June of this year, we were Tallahassee Community College, and we always said community is our middle name and so forth. But in June this year, we made the decision as an institution to switch to Tallahassee State College. There are 28 state or community colleges in Florida. And up until June, we were one of two that still had community in our name. All the other state colleges had switched and changed their name. So now the only other community college name, at least, is Hillsborough Community College in Tampa. But the reason that we made that change, really the drive behind that change, was that we started offering additional bachelor's degrees. We already had a bachelor's in nursing. We had that since 2016. But as of last year, we started offering bachelor's degrees in business administration, elementary education, and exceptional student education, and we have plans to offer more. So in the state of Florida, state colleges can offer bachelor's degrees. We have to be careful in terms of the types of degrees that we offer, because we don't want to compete with our university partners. And Tallahassee happens to have 2 university partners in the city, and that's Florida A&M University. I think there's some people here from Florida A&M. There they are. All right. And also Florida State University. So we have to be careful that we're not competing with our university partners, but rather just complementing what we do, because we want to meet local and regional workforce demands with our AS degrees and also our bachelor's degrees. But you can see there and get an idea of the enrollment. We're very excited. This is the highest our enrollment has been in 10 years. I think that's a nationwide trend, right? Have others had or experienced high enrollment this year compared to years past? So that's exciting that students are returning and coming back after some down periods related to the pandemic. Something that's interesting about us, though, in terms of our institution, is that our average age is about 21. The average age nationwide at a community college is typically about 26 or 27. So why are we so much younger? Well, part of the reason that we are so much younger is because we're very much a transfer-oriented institution. So Florida State, as I was talking earlier with the table here, Florida State University, FSU, has made the decision to become more and more selective, more and more preeminent, and we're the beneficiaries, really, of students that are high achievers, but are not selected to go to FSU. Last year alone, FSU had 75,000 applications, and they accepted 17,000. And of that 17,000, about 7,000 actually enrolled at the institution. So we're the recipients of high-achieving students who, I'm talking about students who have like a 3.5, 3.8 high school GPA, and they aren't selected to enroll at FSU. So we reach out and we have an opportunity to work with those students. And about 50% of our students come to us from outside of our service district as well. So Central Florida, South Florida. So that's the reason for our average age being much lower than what you might typically see at other community colleges. Okay, I also wanted to share just a little bit and really encourage you all to think about yourselves as leaders. No matter what your role is, no matter what your title says, if you're in the classroom, you're a leader of your students. If you are in charge of departments, you're a leader in that respect. But I wanted to approach this talk today by sharing that I have experience in academic support, in academic enrichment, worked with our honors program previously as a faculty member and also in administration. So what's very important for me here and that I really wanted to emphasize, I've kind of thought about leadership, my own personal leadership values over the year. I wanted to really emphasize innovation. I think that is key as we move forward over the next several years. And joy. We have to find happiness in what we do. The work that we do is hard work, but it's very important that we find joy in that work. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the institution. I'll share some specific concrete examples later on. And for right now, I'd like to set the stage by discussing some key considerations of where we are in higher ed. So let me ask you, you've seen this question before. What is the definition of insanity? You all are just like repeating it in unison. Yes. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting what? A different result. We do this in higher ed in some cases, whether we want to admit it or not. For example, we have express courses, or in some institutions they're called late start courses. These courses are excellent for boosting enrollment, for getting your numbers up, right? But we typically know that students who enroll in these late start or these express session courses, like we have September Express, we have October Express, and so forth, those are 12-week, 8-week sessions. Typically, those students are not as successful as students who enroll in main session courses, at least at our institution. So the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and then saying, oh, why are these students not successful? We have to take action, right? We have to recognize that there are some barriers, there are some obstacles. Is it because students who enroll in these express sessions, is it because they, for whatever reason, were unprepared, or maybe they decided late to enroll? Maybe there are a variety of different factors that contribute to them being unsuccessful. Maybe it's because of the pace of the course. It could be that too. That it's a 12-week course, an 8-week course. It's much more compact. It's and it's sped up. So I ask you all that question because I think we get into a circle sometimes, right, where we're doing the same thing, we're seeing the same result, we're thinking about it, and then all of a sudden the next year rolls around or the next semester, and guess what? We're doing the same thing again. We're seeing the same result. So we need to break that cycle. Just within the last 20 years for higher education, think about how it's progressed in terms of the higher education landscape. I started working at a community college in North Carolina in 2011. And at that time, really the mission was access driven. Let's get as many students in the door as possible, which is a great mission. Let's get as many students in the door as possible. Let's provide them with scholarships, opportunities, and so forth. Then it became more about let's not only get as many students in the door as possible, but let's help them to be successful. When I was an undergrad in the early 2000s, really the culture at that time was still look to your left, look to your right. One of you is going to not be here at the end of the semester. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to that other person? And nothing against my institution where I was an undergrad. We didn't have a tutoring center until my senior year, and that was 2005. So think about that, just the way that the culture of support has changed over the years. So access to success to equitable outcomes, and hoping that we can see all students be successful, all students reach the finish line, whatever their finish line might be. And then we've got another wave of community vibrancy, because we know that if students are successful in large numbers, it creates economic and social mobility for those students, especially students who are low income, first generation, and so forth. So we've seen this progression, and it's not that we are not concerned with access anymore, right? That's still an integral part of what we do. But I think all these elements kind of tie in together. Has anyone ever read, heard, or seen anything about the saber-tooth curriculum? Okay, I'm going to give you a very brief synopsis of what this book is about. This book was published in 1939. It's a satirical work that critiques, you'll never guess this, education. A book that came out in 1939, just think about that, at that time was critiquing the traditional values of education. And one of the early chapters describes in this satirical work, it's fiction, but it's about this tribe that used to teach these skills called fish grabbing and tiger scaring, because that was important for survival, right? That was essential for survival. But then what happens in this book is that the landscape, the environment changes, and all of a sudden fish grabbing and tiger scaring are no longer needed, no longer essential. But guess what the school does in saber-tooth curriculum? Even though the environment's changed and it's no longer needed, the school still teaches those elements. So do we do any of that in our current work? Are we still teaching skills that are perhaps not as relevant or as needed as they used to be? So I encourage you to read it. That's just one small synopsis, one chapter, but very thought-provoking read, and again, published in 1939, and it's a great text. So because we're in Disney, how about a complimentary, or we're in Florida, how about a complimentary, we're not in Disney, sorry. But because we're in Florida, how about a complimentary quote to back up the importance of of innovation. And this is from Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. You can't allow tradition to get in the way of innovation. You can't allow tradition to get in the way of innovation. I think tradition is important and has its place. The values, the mission of institutions and so forth, but we have to be nimble and innovative and ready to adapt. I just listed a few of the kinds of typical campus strategic priorities here for you to consider. These may reflect some of the same priorities that you have at your institution as you're thinking about all the different work that we have to do, and then the idea of being innovative to try to achieve these goals. I know one of my goals in my current role as dean is to increase completion of AS students in the different programs that we have, the workforce-related programs. And I'm sure you all have an exhaustive list of strategic priorities as well. So where do we find ourselves moving forward with this? The pandemic, I think, exacerbated some of the common challenges that students face, even going before the pandemic, but certainly afterwards. There are times where you can walk around a campus and you can almost tell when the financial aid checks have been dispersed. Just being honest, you can see that the campus is not, the parking lot is not as full. But our students face so many different challenges, whether it's at the community college level, the university level, no matter where it might be. And what I really think about here is chronic absenteeism. And when students are not seeing the value of attending class, or if it's an online course, not seeing the value of routinely logging in to their online course shells. When I was an online student, I was logging in every day, multiple times a day, to my courses. But some students don't see those, don't necessarily see the value in that. I've also been observing classes recently to, observe my faculty. And at the same time, I also get to see how students are responding in class. And there are some who are engaged and, taking notes and using their laptop or their other devices to take notes. There are some students who are sitting in class now and literally just sitting there. They're not taking notes. Now, what they are doing is taking pictures. They're using their phone to take pictures. In Florida, students can record lectures. They can take pictures with their phone and so forth. So students engage in different ways, but they certainly experience a variety of challenges as well. And we've got to support them in this. So setting the stage as we continue to think about this, why do I have an NBA logo up here? Quick side story, all right, and then I'll lead to the point that I'm going to make. In 2010, LeBron James. Anyone heard of LeBron James? You all know? Okay. So LeBron James, elite, one of the greatest athletes, elite player. In 2010, he did something that was really surprising to the sports world, at least, and that was he made the decision to leave the Cleveland Cavaliers, where he played, where he was drafted and played, and he went to, anyone know? Miami Heat, all right? So this was an elite, one of the best players leaving a team to go and play for another team as a free agent. He said, I'm taking my talents to South Beach, all right? Now, why was this such an unprecedented moment? Because an elite player like that had not traditionally left his team to go and play for another team. What does that have to do with higher education? Well, that moment really led to, in the NBA, what's now referred to as the player empowerment era, right? So players now have this flexibility. They now they don't receive the same kind of heat and criticism that LeBron James did back then. And players can kind of just freely go. They can demand trades. That didn't happen back, before that time. They can say, this isn't working out. I know I'm making, $70 million this year, but I'm going to demand a trade. And that's just a small example of the player empowerment era. But I would also argue that we're in some ways, a student empowerment era as well, which I'm not saying is necessarily positive or negative, but it's just, I believe, a certain era that we're in right now. Students have more options than ever before, right? If they wanted to leave Tallahassee State College, they would have plenty of options within driving distance, reasonable driving distance, but they would also have plenty of options online as well, right? Plenty of options. So we're in this era where we need to respond to students. We have students who, if something doesn't necessarily go their way, they're not only emailing the dean, they're emailing everyone they can find. The vice president, the president, the faculty member. They're putting everybody on there. And this doesn't happen all the time, but this does happen some of the time. Students can now screenshot messages that you and others send to them, and they will use those screenshots if they have to. So in many ways, we're in a student empowerment era. So consider how we can respond within that context. I'm not saying LeBron James led to the higher education student empowerment era, but I am just making the case that society has changed. So, that's one of the societal trends that I wanted to point out and mention to you all. So that's setting the stage. Now, what do we do about it? How do we respond? How do we be innovative? So I think number one is personalization. I saw this image, I don't know if you all can see it there in the back, but I saw this image on LinkedIn yesterday, and I said, I'm perfect, I'm going to include this in the presentation. So this is a PhD student who posted on LinkedIn, said that she dressed up as my supervisor's feedback on my PhD thesis for Halloween because nothing is scarier than reality. So on her shirt, she's got X's and comments and so forth. Pretty clever and creative Halloween outfit, right? But that's a PhD student who's really taken to heart the feedback that she's received, and she was being humorous, of course, but she's taken to heart the feedback that she's received from her PhD advisor. Think about your students. Most of us in here work with undergrads primarily. Think about how they receive. Now, they may not tell you, but think about how they receive the interactions that they have with you. Those one-on-one instances of personalization are critical or valuable for them to move forward and be successful. I also wanted you to consider this question, and I know it's an oxymoron. It's jumbo shrimp. It's an oxymoron. How do we create comfortable urgency for our students? So what do I mean by that? Well, I know we want for our students to be supported. We want for them to be successful. We want for them to hit key milestones. But we also want for them to approach their work with urgency, all right? And that we want them to not necessarily have a timer going off in their minds, but we do want them to be aware of the seriousness of their work so that they can move forward and ultimately be successful. So what I'd like to do is share with you all a teaching and learning framework that we have integrated this year at Tallahassee State College. And it involves these 4 different elements, and I'm going to speak about each of these elements as well and give you some examples. But when I became dean, I wanted to establish a framework, kind of a guiding principles and practices for my faculty. And I have a very eclectic division, very eclectic academic division. We have, in this division here, we have engineering technology, we have business, we have computer programming, computer technology, and we have education. So we have business, industry, technology, and education. I should ask my provost if we can change our name to BITE, business, industry, technology, education. But what I wanted to do was establish a framework. And I knew it wouldn't work if I just came in guns a-blazing and said, this is what we're going to do. So my approach to this was to engage our faculty in the entire process. My real job in this was just to cultivate what they came up with, organize their thoughts, and then present it back out to them so that we could use it. So this is our teaching and learning framework, the 4 different elements. These were determined through conversations with faculty, these 4 elements. Personalizing learning, having enthusiasm for your content, monitoring student progress, and then the wild card, which I'll talk about each of these elements. So my approach after we determined these 4 pillars of the framework was to then identify some specific examples. And the way I did that was simply through faculty feedback. So for each of these questions, or for each of these areas, I asked faculty to respond to these questions. And I know that this is a teaching and learning framework, but imagine how you might alter this framework depending on your own role, whether you're working in counseling, advising, or whatever it might be. There are still elements here that could be useful for you as you think about engaging and working with students. So for personalizing learning, I asked faculty, how do you encourage one-on-one meetings? And how do you provide individualized feedback? All right? So those are the questions that I asked students, or that I asked faculty in terms of working with students. What I did too, to sprinkle in another little bit of AI, I have over 30 faculty in my division, and these were responses that were about 2 pages for each faculty member. I did take time to go and read through the responses, but I also used AI to help me recognize common themes, right? I plugged in their responses and I said identify themes and examples related to the faculty feedback. So that was key, using the faculty feedback and using AI in that context. But those are the questions that I asked for personalizing learning. And these are the examples that emerged from their responses. So faculty mentioned that they try to be proactive communicators. They email students before the semester begins. They have the syllabus in order before the semester begins. They post announcements before the semester begins. Once the semester starts, faculty are reaching out to students who do not submit assignments. They're being proactive in that manner. Our faculty are also great at providing very detailed, specific feedback on assignments. Because it's one thing to say, good job. It's another thing to say, good job, you did this really well, and here's an area where you could potentially improve in, right? There's one that takes more time, but there's one that's way more valuable for students as well. And then another theme that emerged here was flexible support options, so thinking about having office hours at different times of the day, even offering some remote office hours through Zoom at night and so forth. So for each of these, I'm going to share the themes and then also some more specific concrete examples. So faculty do encourage one-on-one meetings during office hours. I can see that just by walking through the halls and seeing and comparing the number of students that are meeting with faculty members now compared to the students that I saw previously when I first took over the role. That's a valuable experience right there. I started talking with instructors though and said, how can we really encourage students to go and see you during your office hours so that they can get that one-on-one time? Because it's one thing to say, here's my office hours, it's on the syllabus, and I hope you can make it. But what our faculty have started to do is come up with reasons, whether it's extra credit or whether it's looking at a specific part of an exam or whether it's following up on a question in class. Our faculty are now coming up with reasons to really promote these one-on-one interactions and to encourage students to do what I think is, in some ways, students might think of office hours as a scary place or as something that they don't want to have to go and do, or they might not even understand what office hours are. Students might not necessarily see office hours and equate that to, oh, that's where I can go and get help. Some students might think, oh, that's when the faculty member is doing his or her work in his or her office, right? So we've been very intentional about that in creating reasons for our students to come and work with our faculty. As well, providing specific feedback with specific action items for improvement. So that's personalization. That's the first part of the pillar. The second part is content enthusiasm. You all know when an instructor is excited about the material that they are teaching. You can tell. I've got an accounting instructor. Now you might think accounting numbers boring. I've got an accounting instructor who is so energetic and so passionate that you can just tell, and the energy feeds into her students. And as a result, her students are engaged, right? But students can tell. Students are very, very good at telling whether or not someone is passionate about the subject. So for content enthusiasm, I ask faculty to consider how you can infuse enthusiasm into your course. I couldn't just say be excited, but also how do you provide real-world examples, case studies, things that students can see that are tangible. And here were the themes that emerge from faculty feedback. Real-world connections being at the top, and that's including working with local industries to see if we can use some specific examples that are challenges that they might be facing that we could then use in class. Just having the personal passion, like I mentioned before, and then making learning as interactive as possible. I have an economics professor, and again, you might think economics, numbers, boring. But I've got an economics professor who breaks up lectures by having small group discussions on different case studies. It's an excellent way to be engaging, and it might not be a surprise for you. He's got very high success rates. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but that's certainly part of it. So some examples, hands-on activities with real-world examples, case studies and projects, and then also current events. Think about all the different current events and how they can be used in terms of structuring content. Third is progress monitoring. So this is what our faculty commit to doing to monitor the progress of students. And P2P, which I'll talk about in more detail later, is called our Pathways to Persistence. This is our early alert, our homegrown early alert model that we use. So I asked faculty, how do you use P2P? How do you provide flexibility? I try to encourage faculty to provide as much reasonable flexibility as possible. And that could mean accepting assignments after the deadline in certain cases. I don't require them to do that, I just say let's really consider the circumstances that the student might be facing. And how do you help students overcome obstacles? So those were the questions that I asked faculty, and these were their responses. And the themes that emerged were, again, this idea of early intervention. If a student's not logging into a course, our faculty, our instructors are reaching out. Having policies in place, you have to have policies in a course, but being flexible with those policies, being flexible in terms of how you work with students. Regular check-ins, and also timely feedback. When students submit work, we try to, within 2 weeks, have assignments graded. So the examples, early and often, and then late work accepted in some circumstances. So that's how our faculty commit to monitoring progress. So what's really nice about this framework is that faculty make commitments to these different areas. And that's been really valuable for us as we have implemented that and continue to do so this semester. Okay, wild card. This was the area where I just wanted to know, what else do you do as an instructor that is mind-blowing, that's unique, that's original, that's creative, whatever it might be? What's something that's truly unique about your approach? So this was the wild card because I didn't want to box any of the faculty members into just, certain areas, because some faculty really shine in other areas. So here were now these themes are more dispersed because of the nature of the question. But faculty mentioned being as student-centered as possible, integrating technology, integrating active learning, and really providing students with a variety of resources, materials, and so forth. We are in a process now of trying to create more OER materials and supporting faculty through that process. So that certainly would fall into this as well. And some specific examples that faculty provided here were efforts to gamify certain parts of their course to really make it more engaging. And I thought this was unique, but providing opportunities for students to reflect on their learning. That's a really valuable cornerstone. So just to recap on the teaching and learning framework, we have these 4 elements: personalization, content enthusiasm, progress monitoring, and then that wild card element, which, like we said, is something that is truly unique to what a faculty member does. So it's one thing to create a framework like that with faculty. It's another thing to keep the momentum moving forward. So the way that I've decided to do that with faculty is, number one, it's integrated into annual goals. So our faculty, probably very similar to yours, and if you work with faculty in this way, have annual workload goals that they have to create. So each of my faculty members has goals that are tied to aspects of the framework. So that way it stays relevant for them. We have visual displays throughout our different offices. And to me, what's really valuable about this framework is that it creates this platform to have an ongoing sharing of best practices, and faculty having conversations with one another, whether it's formal or informal, about what's working in their classes, what's not working, and the framework really helps to establish that communication. So it's been successful so far, and I'm excited to see how it continues to progress. So that's one aspect, right? The framework. If you think about how that's a student-centered, personalized approach, how then do we build upon that to consider institution-wide initiatives and then really be innovative and execute new ideas, new original ideas and new concepts? All right, this is an AI-generated image. I said create a college building made of ice, and that's what it came up with. Quite nice, actually. So response to barriers that students face as we innovate. So I'm proposing, we love acronyms in higher education, right? Yeah, woo-woo on acronyms. So I'm proposing the ICE model. Number one, because we have to be calm, cool, and collected when we come up with different initiatives and strategies and so forth, but also because it's an acronym for being innovative, moving forward with certainty, and then executing the game plan. So let me talk about each of those elements. Innovation. I think of this as new ideas for old challenges. We talked about that before in terms of being innovative over tradition. We've seen a lot of this rhetoric around redesign this, reimagine that. You all have probably seen that in your work as well, but I do think there's value in that. So let's pause for a moment and think about, and we could use any company, for example, but I'll just use Netflix for this example. What if you could reimagine higher education and you could use Netflix as a model? How different would the experiences that students have if Netflix was the model that you used? So I'll ask you, what can we learn from Netflix? How do our students use it, and what do our students learn? So, you know yourself from being, I'm sure, a Netflix user, that what do you do on Netflix if you like a show? If you really like a show, you give it a thumbs up. But if you really, really like it and you've got nothing to do on the weekend, you're going to watch the entire thing, right? You're going to binge it. You also have a great deal of variety on Netflix. You can watch things that are of interest to you. It's also available on demand. You can pause in the middle of a show if you want to. These elements, and this is just one example, this is how our students interact with, in some ways, entertainment. Do they expect or demand the same kinds of flexibility in their interactions with you? That's just something for you to consider and think about. So, how do your students use Netflix? Probably in a very similar way to how you use Netflix, right? There's probably not much difference. And then what do students learn from using Netflix? Well, they learn that they like to have things on demand, that if they're passionate about something, that they could potentially, binge their way through a show. What would happen if we had a course, let's just say, for example, in this scenario, what if we had a course model where students could binge their way through a course? In other words, they could take 2 weeks to complete it, or they could take an entire semester. What would be the ramifications of that? I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that I support that. I'm also not saying that it's necessarily a bad idea. I'm just throwing it out there for consideration. There might be some students who would excel in being able to complete a course on their own time and as quickly as possible. But would they then cover all the learning outcomes? Does it devalue certain aspects of the educational experience? I think these are all questions to consider as we move forward and try to think of new ways to approach these old challenges. So something that I did, I used to teach the Honors Interdisciplinary Seminar, which was one of my favorite courses. And something that I did in this course was created an assignment where students would record a podcast. And whenever I told students this initially, they were like, oh my God, we have to do what? And I said, it's just a recorded conversation. That's all a podcast is, a recorded conversation. So I took a podcast that I had listened to. Anyone heard of the Rewatchables podcast? Anyone listened to that before? Yes. All right, we got one. All right, so in the Rewatchables podcast, the point of the podcast is to return to films that someone has seen before, and to the podcasters discuss the films by using different categories. Like they'll have best time to go to the bathroom if it's a really boring moment. They'll have heat check for an actor that appeared for just a little while but made a significant impact. They'll have who won the movie. You talk about which character was the most significant and so forth. So it's a really fun podcast. And I was listening to it one day, driving in to work, and I thought, what if I took the Rewatchables podcast and turned it into an assignment for students? So this is an example of how I think you can pick up on ideas that aren't meant for or designed for higher education, and you can create some really unique experiences for students. This was by far, and I taught this class for 4 years before I transitioned into my current role, this was by far my students' favorite assignment. They were always nervous about it, and whenever they started, they were always nervous, the nervous laughter and so forth, but they always got into a really nice groove with it as well and did really, really well. So, I think that's just one example of how you can be creative. You can identify things that, like I said before, aren't meant for higher ed, but could be with just a little tinkering. So that was the innovation part of the ICE model. Certainty. How can we be certain about what we're doing, about the decisions that we're making in higher ed? Well, I think the way that we are certain is by pointing to data. And we can use data in a variety of different ways. We can make data-informed decisions. But how can we be certain about what we're doing? At my institution, when we're thinking about enrollment, we have about 80% in person and about 20% online in the fall semester. In the spring semester, it's about 60-40. And in the summer, it's about 20-80. And it's like that, it's been like that, I should say, every year. So that data helps to inform us, as we are planning classes and so forth, about the modality that we need to offer students. So we can be certain of the decisions that we're making based on data. And there's a term that you may have heard of before. I know IR representatives have heard of this, but that's lead and lag indicators. So let me give you a couple of examples. So an example of a leading indicator is, like I just mentioned there, course registration patterns. When are students registering? What does that tell us about potential course offerings that we need to provide? Then you can also consider student engagement metrics. And again, these are just examples of leading indicators. But early term student participation. So whether a student, you know that if a student's not attending class early on in the semester, that might be a warning sign that the student is not engaged or is not going to be successful. Same thing for even for academic support services, right? Like if a student is really engaged, they're likely going to tutoring, they're going to advising, they're logging into the learning management system and so forth. Those are all leading indicators because you're able to take at least some measure of action based on that data, right? So that's why it's considered a leading indicator. Lagging indicators also valuable, and some examples of that would be program completion rates. This reflects the goals of the institution, right? And another example would be post-graduation employment rates, and that demonstrates, ultimately what you want to achieve as an institution. So those data also incredibly important and part of that certainty that informs your decisions. And then we move to execution. So for this stage, think about it in these terms. You're dreaming, you're designing, you're delivering. We all know, and this is what's so unique about this conference, there's so many different roles in the room, but at your institution, you have to collaborate with student affairs, IR, academic affairs, that you have to identify those key stakeholders as you are innovating and working toward new ideas. There's also a framework as a part of this that I wanted to share with you called the 4 Disciplines of Execution, 4DX. For short. And an example of 4DX is that you first identify something that's called a WIG, in this case, a wildly important goal. And just as an example, let's say you wanted to increase first-year student retention. Then, as part of 4DX, you act on those lead measures, whatever in this case it might be, but whatever in this case it is, faculty-student mentoring, early intervention, and so forth. Then you come up with, in the 4DX frame, a compelling scoreboard. This is a way for you to visually capture the information that you're working on. Well, what I like the most about this work is the cadence of accountability. And what that is that's weekly short meetings where groups come together and discuss everything that they're working on related to the wildly important goal. Nothing else is discussed and is focused on the wildly important goal. So the 4DX framework works really well. I used this about 6 years ago at my previous institution in North Carolina when I was trying to increase the number of students who were going to our tutoring center and increase the number of visits for those students. So those were the wildly important goals. We met as a team every week to talk about strategies, whether it was visiting classes, whether it was hosting workshops, coming up with different ideas to increase the number of students and increase the number of visits. And it was very, very successful in terms of increasing both of those. So consider, these different frameworks as you're working through to be innovative. But just a recap of ICE. Innovate, be certain, and then execute. So now I'm going to throw it to you for just a second. And I used Netflix as an example earlier. You could fill in the blank. It could be YouTube, it could be TikTok, you could plug in any company, right? But what other companies, and then I'll expand this, platforms, movements, books, or even people can influence the way you approach your work in the world of student success? So think outside the boundaries of higher ed and just consider that question for a moment. And then what we'll do is, to tie this all into AI, we'll experiment with AI. I'll use a couple of examples that you all come up with, and we'll see what kind of new model we can come up with. So it doesn't have to be redesigning or reimagining all of higher ed. It could be, let's say you're responsible for a tutoring center on your campus. How could I use the TikTok model to redesign my tutoring center? So you can think of it in that way too. So I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes. We're at these nice tables, just to turn to the people at your table and consider that first question on the screen. 2 minutes, ready, set, go. So go ahead and talk to each other. That's fine. Okay, I will pause you right there. I hate to interrupt good conversation, but I'll pause you right there, and we'll come back together now. And what I've done while you were conversing with your table is I've pulled up an AI LLM, large language model, called Claude. Anyone use Claude? A few? Okay. I know most of you have probably heard of or used GPT, so I just wanted to show you a different model. I like Claude. It's conversational in a lot of different ways. It will ask you kind of follow-up questions and so forth. You can also, and I know you can do this with GPT as well, but you can plug in entire documents, and it'll give you feedback on documents. I actually did that in preparation for my presentation. I plugged in my entire slide deck and said, give me feedback for my presentation that I'm preparing for. I could have even said, create a couple of jokes, but I didn't do that. So I'm going to use Claude, but we got a mic. All right, perfect. So if I can just have someone share, going back to the original question, which company, or you could have expanded into some other frame, but just to have an example and see what we can come up with is where we're just ideating, we're brainstorming, we're creating on the spot here. So let's see what if anyone would like to volunteer to share, and I will, based on the company and the conversation that you all had, I'll plug in a prompt and we'll see what we come up with. So what did you all discuss?
So we discussed two different things, but one of which was YouTube. Kind of following along your Netflix. With YouTube having the opportunity to lock and dislock videos. The comments section kind of being used as a discussion board and like distance education, so you can leave feedback for either your professor or your peers. And then the ability to be able to make playlists, whether it's things I'm well versed in, not well versed in, things to reconsider, things to look into, so on and so forth. And then possibly utilizing those reference videos that pop up afterwards to have the opportunity to kind of continue on with your learning. So just following how you said learning from Netflix and taking from that, just kind of leveraging the same features of YouTube and utilizing that in the classroom. So allowing the discussions in a classroom to kind of give you feedback as opposed to students using those like rating sites, and being able to say, hey, here's a knowledge bank, much like the playlist feature on YouTube.
Wow. That was really good, and it almost defeats the purpose. You all have already brainstormed. It almost defeats the purpose of what you came up with. I'll build on that, though, and we'll just see. So we'll say create a, do we want to just keep it focused in the classroom for this example?
You can go as big as you want. Let's do department.
Okay. So create a model for an academic. It's hard to type on the spot. Create a model for an academic department based on YouTube. We'll just say based on YouTube, and we'll see what it comes up with. Wow. Well, that was unexpected. But and I just talked about how great Claude was. Good thing you all talked through it. That is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's what that is. Yeah, let me do that. Okay. Now, oh my goodness, now it's giving us code. Okay. So now, though, it is getting back to some of the, this is about as embarrassing as it could be, I think. All right, so in this model, it says the academic department class represents a department that operates a YouTube channel. So it's not exactly what we were looking for. And you all know in using AI, you might get some responses that surprise you. You just usually hope that's not in front of 300 people. But what you can do, though, is if we were continuing down this thought process, we could continue to prompt it and try to get to the answer that we really wanted. Now, what's interesting, though, is that you all already thought through so much of how that dynamic would work that you almost didn't even need to go here. Maybe I shouldn't have, because yours was so detailed. Let's take one more example and see what happens. Anybody else? Anybody else want to share a specific company that we could use to reimagine higher ed or a specific component of higher ed?
Could we try Peloton and a model for sense of belonging?
All right. Did I spell, is Peloton P-E-L-A-T-O-N? Close enough? And again, it's in a mood to give code today. But we do see some ideas that emerge from that. Sense of belonging in higher education based on the Peloton framework includes the following key factors: peer connections, faculty engagement, institutional fit, and co-curricular achievement, it says. So it's not exactly working how I envisioned in terms of really giving some robust examples. Maybe I should have just used GPT. But I think you all get the idea, the thought process behind it. And if you don't get the responses that you want, then you can always go back and use a different AI model, or you can tweak your prompt that you used in that case. So let me return to the slides. So I would say the experimentation with AI was a fail. But again, you all get the idea, you get the concept. Use AI to brainstorm and come up with new ideas. Connect parts of society that you might not have previously considered into how you would innovate, create, structure, come up with new ideas that could be beneficial for your students. So a little bit of feedback on AI. Typically, when you're using AI, no matter what you unless it's egregious, no matter what you are coming up with, AI is going to be very positive in most cases. It's going to say, oh, that's a great idea. Is it? You got to really kind of think about it. So fact, check, and reflect. Check for accuracy. And what I like to do is use an approach called the AI sandwich, which if we have more time, I could have shown you that. But basically, it's the prompt. It's a layered approach. It's the prompt that you come up with. It's the input or the output that you receive from AI. And then it's either tweaking the original prompt or taking action on what you receive. So it's a layered approach there. And that's just called the AI sandwich, an easy way for you to remember how to use AI. So takeaways. AI is usually, not today apparently, but usually good for brainstorming student success initiatives. The prompt specificity is very important. You all noticed with my example that I originally prompted it with, it didn't want to respond for whatever reason, but we had a great suggestion here to just change the prompt to say business model, and then we were getting more of what we were looking for. I think we, in terms of thinking about AI, need to build strategic checkpoints for our students, whether that's involving AI at the orientation level or involving AI in the classroom, certainly. And three somewhat bold predictions that I'll share with you is I think we'll see more and more AI-related degrees. We are actually offering at Tallahassee State College an applied AI degree where students can learn about machine learning, large language models, computer vision, and so forth. So I think we'll see more of that. I think we might also see AI be, I don't know if it'll necessarily be a standalone class, but I think we'll see AI in certain parts of the gen ed curriculum. I'm not talking about like tomorrow, but maybe, in the next few years, we may see AI become more and more important in the gen ed curriculum as well. And from an institutional perspective, I think we're going to see AI in strategic goals for institutions. And it might be AI literacy, or it might be phrased in some other way, but I think we are going to see that as we move forward. Okay, let's shift now to the final part of my talk today, and that's simply addressing this question: why does innovation matter? Why is it important? We're not just innovating to innovate. So I'll be sharing some specific examples of work that I've done at Tallahassee State College. So something that I'm really proud of, and that our institution is also very proud of, is our Aspire transfer program. So I mentioned previously how FSU has become more and more selective, more and more preeminent. That gave us an opportunity to reimagine our transfer pathway. We used to call it TCC to FSU because we were Tallahassee Community College, and that worked well for many years. But what we've done now is rebranded that to, in partnership with FSU, to call it the Aspire TSC to FSU. And this is a great partnership. Through Aspire, we have 4 different pathways for our students. One is the traditional pathway. That's the 2-year plan for students to complete their associate's degree and then transfer to FSU. The second pathway is what we call Aspire Elite. This is for students who come in with 30 or more credits from dual enrollment, AP, IB, ACE, and so forth. And I'm sure you all are seeing that as well. More and more students who do have dual enrollment credit. So we have an elite pathway for them, whereas if they come in with that much credit before they get to us, we work with them for it to be a 1-year experience with us so that they can then transfer in 1 year. So that's the benefit of Aspire Elite. We have Aspire Honors, which I previously in my last role worked with specifically. This is a program that's designed for high achieving students who are looking to participate in an experience with smaller class sizes and so forth. And then we have our Aspire Online. This is, like you might think, for students who are remote. But all 4 of those pathways are related to the goal of students transferring to FSU in 2 years or less. Comfortable sense of urgency there. And what we do is use aligned curriculum maps. FSU tells us what students need to take. That is very beneficial for us in the advising space. And we also don't have to play the guessing game of, does this course equate to this course? In the state of Florida, we use a standard common course numbering system across both state colleges and universities. And it is seamless and it is wonderful. So ENC 1101 at our institution is the same as ENC 1101 at FSU or at FAMU or any other university in the state of Florida. So that's been very beneficial for us, and it takes out the guessing game. We also have FSU Advising Days, where advisors from FSU will come onto our campus. And we recently launched a transfer center that's dedicated to helping students transfer to not only FSU, but also to Florida A&M, as well as consider our own bachelor degrees that we have as well. So the transfer center has been very useful in that regard. Wanted to play a quick video, and this is less than 2 minutes, of our Aspire Honors program. Aspire Honors is for honor students who have the goal of transferring to FSU. In order to be admitted, students need a 3.5 or higher high school GPA. The real unique experience is in the honors classroom. That's where we have a smaller class size of about 15 to 20 students, and students are completing like interesting projects in the honors classes or having interesting experiences, unique, that might not happen in a standard class.
I find it to be more like interactive, like with the professor, more one-on-one time, because the classes are a lot smaller. Also, I feel like the kids in the class are more willing to like speak and have discussions on the topics that we're talking about.
Aspire is like a really great program because it's like so seamless and you get the best of both worlds. So I'm able to be here, do my school here, but I can go to the football game on the weekend, go to the same events that an FSU student would.
Going to the Aspire program, I have had really good advising. So they've been making sure that, the classes I need line up with what the major of meteorology needs, because once I transfer, I will be a junior, so I will be declaring my major.
It's all about preparing them for the next step, and I do think that because we're the #1 transfer institution to FSU, that students have that opportunity to have a smooth transition from a smaller high school setting to us, and then we provide that bridge to FSU. So that's our Aspire model, and that video was recorded a couple of years ago when we were still at Tallahassee Community College and when I had less gray hair. But it is an excellent model, an excellent framework for our students to help them transfer to FSU. Another little side note here is that we have students who come to us because they weren't selected to attend FSU. They weren't admitted in the fall semester. They come to us and they know that they want to go to FSU, but they don't know what they want to do there. They don't know what they want to major in. And I heard someone say they're picking a mascot and not a major. And you all might have encountered this as well. So we really try to talk with students who are interested in transferring about their courses and about the limited access programs that FSU offers to make sure that they're really aligning their interest and their goals. But it is an excellent program, and we've seen really positive results. So in my current role, we were thinking about this idea of why does innovation matter? We wanted to respond to local and regional workforce demand. Prior to this year, prior to the beginning of 2024, we had 10 AS degrees in my division, business administration, some of the more common AS degrees that you might associate with a community college. This year alone, we launched all those degrees that are on the screen. So we launched 14 new AS degrees, which meant, of course, we had to go and hire new faculty and so forth. But we launched 14 new AS degrees to try to meet the local and regional workforce demand and to give students an opportunity to complete a 2-year program and then enter the workforce if they chose to. Which of these programs do you think is the most in demand? Any other guesses? It might not be the one that you expect. Medical office administration is actually our most in-demand new program. And I think part of that is because students can see through that degree that, oh, if I get a degree in medical office, I'm going to go work in a medical office, right? It's pretty straightforward. They can see that pathway. There's also a demand in the Tallahassee area, probably in other areas, for medical office administrators. Other degrees that we're excited about include the AI degree that I mentioned earlier, and we also started an animation and game art program, which we're hoping to connect with local businesses in that regard, but also Orlando, Atlanta, thinking about some of those animation studios as well. So it's been a very busy time, very exciting though to launch so many new programs at the same time. Again, thinking about innovation. Reimagined campus spaces at TSC. When I first arrived at TSC, I was the director of the Learning Commons. And I walked in and I thought, what a wonderful space. It was this huge 2-floor building devoted to academic support. But I said we've got to change some things up just in terms of the visual look of it. Everything was Barnes & Noble beige. So it was in need of some cosmetic facelift. So we did some new signage. We painted the walls with TSC colors. And that alone helped to drive interest and bring in students. But more importantly, we also added new initiatives. I started an initiative called boot camps, where before the semester began, we identified the top 5 high enrollment gateway courses, and we set up what we called boot camps for these high enrollment gateway courses: college composition, college algebra, general psychology, and so forth. And we promoted to students before the semester even began to give them a chance to come to one of our boot camps to have a preview of those courses so that they would know what to expect, they would know the textbooks, they would know kind of chapter 1 information, and we hope that that would prepare them. So students who attended boot camps, might not surprise you, were more successful than students who did not. But that was just one example of something that we did differently in the Learning Commons. We're also in the midst right now of designing a new makerspace. We don't want to call it a makerspace. We're gonna call it something else, but just for the purposes of today's presentation so that you have an idea of what it will be. My whole intent in designing this space, we received a grant from the state for it, and very thankful for that. But my whole intent was to make sure that this space didn't look anything like a classroom or a computer lab. We wanted it to look truly unique and truly different. And it's not just all about the look, but I do think that that's important. And we're going to have programs like supply chain management, cybersecurity, and engineering in that area. Our college also initiated a classroom renovation to add new technology, movable furniture, and so forth, and we called that the First Class Initiative. Pathways to Persistence, I mentioned this before. This is our early alert model that we use, and it's really about faculty monitoring student progress at key points throughout the semester. So if it's a traditional 15-week semester, at the 4, 8, and 12-week mark, faculty are checking to make sure that grades are updated, and they're also making sure that student names are submitted for anyone who has below a 60. And that information goes to our academic success coaches, who then reach out to the students to find out what's going on, provide support, refer them to tutoring, refer them to financial aid, whatever the situation may be. And that's our model that we use for early alert. And everything is in-house. We don't have an outside vendor for that, but that has certainly been helpful for us as we try to support students. Earlier, it was mentioned that I was able to increase our honors program enrollment. Can you find me there on the screen? Yes. This was at our honors first year orientation a couple of years ago. And I felt that it was really important to bring in all the new students that we admitted to the program for a kickoff to the year. And this was something that was new for our institution, but we had an orientation specifically for students in the honors program. Now, how were we able to increase honors? It was working with faculty, staff, and administration and saying, what can we do better? When I first started with the honors program, we had 49 students. I always remember that number because we were just below 50. We had 49 students in the program, but there was a real opportunity to increase the participation. And we started working really closely with advising over the summer so that we could promote the program and enroll students on the spot who are interested. We also had some information sessions. We put out more marketing materials and so forth. We also created more honors course offerings. All of those efforts helped to increase our enrollment to starting at 49 to, by the time I was about to leave honors and go into my new position, we had over 300 students in the program. So that was very exciting to see the program grow, to put in new initiatives that help to support students in that case. An offshoot of the honors program was an event that we came up with focused on leadership. And the name of this event was Pasta with the President. Our president's on the screen beside me there. And I'll give our president props here, because I approached him and said, can we do a kind of a lunch and learn type of event for honors students? And he said, sure. And I said, can we just do something like pizza? And he said no. He said, if they're going to come out, let's give them something nicer. Let's give them something better. And I said, well, it's got to be something that's alliteration, so I'm going to go, how about pasta with the president? So we had this great catered meal. We had faculty from the honors program who brought their classes. That was essential, who brought their classes to this event. And then, of course, we invited other honors students as well. And this was just one example of how we were providing a leadership style experience, because our president was able to speak about his leadership journey, but then also hear from the students, and what they wanted to achieve. Another new initiative that we started the last couple of years was increasing undergraduate research. This involved honor students, but was also for the entire institution. So we do have an undergraduate research symposium every year. I was able to also work with faculty to create an in-house academic journal where students would submit research, and it would go through a peer review process from our faculty who were involved with that initiative. So we had the symposium, we had the in-house academic journal, which we promoted to the students as a way of saying, this is a chance for you to publish your work. They're like, why is that important? So we, then talked to them about why that could be an important part of your resume, your leadership journey, and so forth. And at every step of the way, whether it was for the symposium or for the in-house journal, faculty mentors were key to creating buy-in, creating interest from the students. And when you are able to create an environment where students feel supported and students feel successful, it's very encouraging. So I wanted to share this image on the screen of 3 students who were successful at our institution, and actually took the time to send me a photo that said, hey, we're here at FSU orientation, thank you. And that's just very encouraging and exciting, and we've all been there when we've seen students reach their milestones and achieve their goals. We also had students creating their own videos. So I'll see if this will play. This is it's about a 10-second clip. It's a TikTok transition video. So let me see if this will play here.
The king has returned.
So very quick, but that was student created. It's celebrating, graduating, and then transferring to FSU. So as we move forward, what are your next steps to consider as you think about this work? This is an image from High Point University, which I heard about, and I thought, what a neat idea. But they don't have a traditional study space here. That's actually an airplane fuselage, which is constructed as a study space. But the intent of that at High Point is for students, to prepare for daily life work, so that they'll know what it's like to be on an airplane and converse with other people and be in tight quarters, but still need to get work done, still need to study. So I thought, what a unique, creative idea. What are some other ways that we could perhaps in our physical space create environments that prepare students for daily life work? And you could kind of let your mind go there with what that might look like. What about simulation? So this is an AI-generated image, and the prompt was create an image of a putting green on a college campus. And for some reason, there are about 3 different putting greens and about 300 students watching this action. But you again get the idea, how can we create simulated spaces for our students that are really engaging? Now, why do I say a putting green or a virtual driving range? Well, I heard a long time ago that business deals are made on a golf course. So I think it's thinking creatively about our spaces. We all want for our students to either return to campus or to be on campus or to be engaged on campus. But we got to get away from just the traditional desk and chairs, and they can be more comfortable at home, quite honestly. So what can we do differently as we simulate and create really exciting spaces? But also, how would faculty and staff be involved in this work? How can we measure the usefulness of these spaces or connect these kinds of ideas to programs, to services that really matter for students? I recently wrote an article about future curriculum in community colleges, and I tried to come up with 10 different new college courses that we might see in the future. And these were just some of those examples, but we have to be ready to innovate. Has anyone heard of vertiports? These are vertical airports for unmanned vehicles that will, within the next 5 years, be able to transport materials, goods, and services, and also people. They're being developed in Florida and in other areas. We're looking at Orlando, Miami, and some of the other major cities having vertiports. So how do we prepare students for new technology as it emerges? So I'll leave you with this. Anybody remember Jeopardy James? He approached Jeopardy differently than others. He thought about it differently, and it helped that he was, so intelligent, so fast on the buzzer, and so forth. But he had a different approach. He went after the higher values first. You remember watching Jeopardy 10 years ago? Almost everyone went from the top to the bottom, right? Top to the bottom. He changed the game because he went to higher values first. He did these huge wagers that most Jeopardy players would stay away from, right? You all remember his run that he had a few years ago. And it was all about his pace, his rhythm of buzzing in and so forth. You can be Jeopardy James in your institutions. You can create, innovate. You can do things differently that'll have some really positive outcomes. So as a call to action, I just encourage you to observe and respond to societal trends so that you can innovate personalized educational practices to meet evolving students' needs. In other words, think differently, be creative, and see what you can come up with, and maybe don't use Claude like I did, maybe use a better AI. Here's my contact information if any of you are interested in continuing this conversation. I'd welcome hearing from you and learning more about what you're doing at your institution. I provided my email as well as my number there, and the QR code should take you to my LinkedIn page if you'd like to connect there. But I think we're about at time, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.